minds were just blown when you said that. Am I ruining this show for people who have never seen it?
You can take English and you can turn it inside out.
Somebody please find out how you join ISIS.
So like 6 times as good as
We sound drunk, but we're just being Latina and laughing.
We're just getting started. Melissa Rosenberg, Vic Mensa, Viet-Thanh Nguyen, Stephen Cannell,
Robin Costa Lewis,
Rami Youssef, Gloria Calderon, Tanya Saracho, Chris Marcus, and Stephen McFeely.
It's Rough Draft.
It's Rough Draft. It's Rough Draft. This one's for you. Welcome, everybody, to Rough Draft Live. I'm your host, Reza Aslan. The show is brought to you, of course, by the 92nd Street Y and Topic. My guest tonight is the lovely and talented, which, by the way, is officially the most sexist way of introducing a woman. The lovely and talented Bess Kalb. Hi, Bess.
I'll take your lovely and talented. My
lovely
God.
And talented.
Thank you.
Bess, of
Reza,
course,
it's an honor.
Emmy-nominated comedy writer for The Jimmy Kimmel Show, the author of this magnificent new book, Nobody Will Tell You This But Me. I love this book. I actually kind of teared up at the end a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's an odd new thing for me. I'm a comedy writer and people are crying over what I write.
There's a lot, a very thin line between comedy and tragedy, as you well know, of course.
It's true. That's true.
Do you have your cocktail? We have our soulmate.
I have my soulmate sidecar. I have a very improvised soulmate sidecar. I have sort of a kitchen sink soulmate sidecar.
Is it booze?
I have alcohol in this cup.
Then it works. Then it's just fine. Cheers to you, by the way.
Cheers to you. Cheers to everyone watching. Maybe I'll get drunk in isolation together.
That's right. That's right. Well, this show, its signature is that, we drink a lot while we do it, but usually the show is, taped in a bar with other people. And when you do it just alone in your office, I think it's just called alcoholism, right? I think that's
No, this is a problem. This is everyone tuning in is an enabler rather than an audience member. Pathetic.
Listen, first of all, congratulations on the book. It's really, really lovely and beautiful.
Oh.
It's this kind of gorgeous distillation of 3 generations of women within a family. You talked about it. I love the way that you described it. You said that it was a ghost memoir.
Yeah.
Can you explain that to for those of you unfamiliar with the book? It's the story of your grandmother, but it's told in her voice. And your grandmother is no longer with us. So what do you mean by this new genre you have created called the ghost memoir?
Yeah, I don't know. I hopefully have not created a new genre, but it was a sort of tough sell. This is not a memoir and it's not a novel. This is not an autobiography either. It's my grandmother's story in her own words from beyond the grave, but I'm writing it. So my editor called it literary ventriloquism, which I can barely say out loud.
That's good.
I think that's overshooting. What it is it's my beloved grandma kvetching at you through me. And that's the genre.
She's such an incredible character, and there's so many ways to have written about her. Why do it in this way? Why sort of adopt her voice and write it as an autobiography, from beyond the grave?
For people who met her in her life, and for readers who feel like they've met her now, there's really no other way to tell her story than in her own words. This book was me letting her have the last word that she never got. As any funny, like in recounting a funny person's story, you can't help but affect their tone, pick up their mannerisms. I felt like the best way and only way to do justice to the way my grandma told stories was to just sort of do her as a character. And it was a great cheat. I'm a fraud. I'm not really a writer. I just am doing a character.
Were there any books that influenced you when you did this? I mean, where did this idea even come from? I mean, did you just think to yourself, and I want to know like how the process whereby you actually pitch this to a publisher, where you're like, I'm going to write, a memoir, but from the perspective of my deceased grandmother.
Yeah. There are many contemporary novels that I think have done great experiments in voice. I mean, I feel like Room was a way to
Mhm.
handle the idea of a narrator whose voice is so central to the plot around him. Room, of course, was told in the voice of a 5-year-old child. There are books like Visit from the Goon Squad, where you're ping-ponging back and forth between different voices and different characters
Mhm.
and taken along, creating a sense of place and time and people through voices. But no, there wasn't really an example of something like this. And my literary agent and the various publishers who were presented with this treatment and this proposal were excited that there hasn't been something like this. There hasn't been a ghost memoir.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Pale Fire technically for the like Nabokov heads.
Yeah,
Can have like
that's me. That's my man. That's my jam.
right. Yeah,
Nabokov is my
exactly.
jam.
Yeah, I like butterflies, fine. But yeah, there's been so would I say I'm sort of the Nabokov of Jewish grandmothers? No. There's no way to talk about it without sounding incredibly pretentious. I will say the idea of having to put like a thing underneath the title that says either a novel or a memoir was a series of emails with my incredible editor and her incredible assistant. It took us like 2 weeks to nail down a true as told to me story.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk actually a lot about the use of voice in this book in a moment, but do us a favor, walk us through the process of delving into your family's history for this book. Like, were there things about your family? You guys seem, I mean, you and your grandmother are obviously very, very close, but I wonder if there were things that either surprised you or things that you didn't know about your family or your grandmother. And I also want to know how your family responded to the book.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And again, there's
I would
sort of
imagine.
there's the how my family has responded to my face and how they're all, quietly talking about this amongst themselves.
That's right,
which
exactly.
Historically, it's always very different. They're
Behind
like,
your
"Oh my
back.
God, we love it." Yeah, of course. Thank
Mhm.
you for writing this. And they're like, "Jesus Christ, did anyone think about asking us?" But no, I love my family very much. They've been very, very supportive. To answer the later question first, they've been very supportive. My grandfather, who is sort of
Only
my
because it was
nephew.
successful. If
That's
it
right,
weren't
that's right.
successful, then they would let you know. But it's successful, so they're gonna let it
Honestly,
go. Anyway, go ahead.
It was their primary concern. I was like, "Do you want to read it? Do you want to? I mean, this is the woman that we all love. You're not mentioned in it. This is really just a matrilineal story of the women and our family. But if you'd like," and they were like, "Okay, so what's the marketing budget? What are we like? Are we gonna be on Oprah?" Yeah, they're like, "I know someone who knows someone who knows Oprah." And we're like, "No, you don't." Yes.
Yeah.
And it turns out my cousin's friend's sister was in the audience once at a taping. So we're very excited. Which is closer than I've gotten to Oprah. But the process of writing this was full of surprises. I feel like I felt sort of like an investigative journalist into my own maternal heritage, into my mom and my grandma. And I feel like if there was ever a therapist who wanted to write a book on how to solve all of your issues with your mom and the women that you come from, you should write in their voice. It really was sort of a surprising exercise in empathy and just the mere idea of having to process information through my grandmother's character made me forgive her for a lot of her tougher moments and understand where she was coming from for a lot of the struggles that are in the book. For those of you who have read it, you know that the general gist is my grandma was not a good mother and was a incredible grandmother. And so it examines the disconnect about love skipping a generation and sort of having this do-over with your granddaughter. And so I was surprised by how much how much my empathy exploded for my mom, my grandma. And then just in sort of the journalistic enterprise of fact checking a life, to call my grandpa, to call Georgie and Leo's survivors, to my cousin Jeannie, to talk to my mom constantly about this was just filling sort of reams of notebooks and endless hours of recording, of like arcane family history. I
Mm.
felt like I was doing a sort of ancestry.com for no one, and then had to figure out what would be a compelling read, and that's this,
It is
hopefully.
wonderful. It's funny you brought this up kind of casually when you were talking about the fact that your grandmother did not have a close relationship with your mother. She admits it. She admits as much. You know, I think there's this really wonderful point where she apologizes to you for something and then just admits she's never apologized to her own daughter before. And I may be wrong about this, but as I read the book, I also noticed that, you know, your mother is also, at least wasn't that close to you, and is, you know, very doting on your child now.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I have 3 sons, and then I finally got a daughter. And so maybe this is at the top of my mind right now. What is the deal with moms and daughters? What is that about?
You know, I can only describe it. I don't have the answer. If I had the answer, then I would be talking to you from my castle in, you know, Lake Como. But from my personal experience, when I found out that I was having a boy, I remember just the wave of relief. And my OB ended up saying something like,
Right.
yeah, I can, the look on your face right now, I see a lot from women who had maybe tough relationships with their mother. By the way, my mother is wonderful, and she and I have an incredibly close
I'm
relationship
sure.
now.
Yeah.
She's watching my kid. We're co-quarantining in a pod now together. And by the way, that I'm doing anything related to the 92nd Street Y is like nirvana for her. She's like told all of her enemies. She's so excited.
It's Jewish heaven.
Oh my God, it is. It's Jewish Mecca. It's Jewish heaven.
Yes.
Yeah. This is my pilgrimage. You're like, it's sad, but it's true.
I mean, fewer people get trampled to death, but yes. Yes.
Yeah,
I could see how it's a Jewish Mecca. I totally agree.
It really is. But the way that I felt when I found out I was pregnant with my son, I think meant that I was sort of spared the agony that I inflicted on my mom. That this was by no means a judgment on my mother. It was all about just the terror and the force of evil that is a 14-year-old girl. You know, the things that came out of my mouth, you know, probably ruined my mom and my life forever. Just like in a casual getting ready for school conversation. And I was like a good kid, so God help. I think, but yeah, I
But there was
think
also a
that
disconnect between your grandmother and her mother. Like, that story is really told. The story of your great grandmother is remarkable, of fleeing Russia and coming to the United States at 14 by herself, and somehow she knows the name of one Jew in America.
She married him.
It's like,
you know, which is the most Jewish thing.
Yeah, just find this one Jew that's in America and you'll be fine. And she did. And next thing you know,
totally. I feel like find the Jew for a Jewish girl is a good directive. Like that's it'll get you through your door.
I'm Muslim. If I say the phrase "find the Jew," it's awkward, I guess.
Totally.
That's what I'm trying to say.
No, it's not. It's fine. I will say the idea of female suffering as an inherited trait, and I don't think this is specific to Judaism at all. If anything, you know, my Muslim friends have very similar relationships with their mothers and grandmothers. My sister-in-law, especially, who might be watching, hi Rai. But the way that I think the suffering of the women who came before us defines our experience is something that I was really interested in, and something that I was just sort of imbued in and a byproduct of. And so in sort of figuring out why relationships between mothers and daughters are tough, I was able to understand, well, there's actually 4 generations that you have to look at. You have to see why the mother is so tough. What was she forged in? And then why was that woman the way she was? You know, what was the crucible that made her sort of this steely, tough woman? And I think as this is an immigrant story, this is the story of women who came from nothing, who came truly with nothing, alone from fleeing religious persecution. And I think there's sort of a toughness that gets built in. That's not sort of this sort of Susie cream cheese, easy Norman Rockwell existence. When you're the byproduct of that, there's going to be a woman who suffered and is in many ways afraid to love because she's understood loss so intimately. Yeah.
There's this line that your grandmother has when she's complaining about your mother. And the way that she puts it is that she says that your mother is ungrateful, right? That's the key thing. The ungrateful at every turn, threatening to throw it all away, everything that your grandmother gave her. And I love this line here. She says, "It wasn't her politics I opposed, it was her hubris." And I think that there's something, as an immigrant, raising very well-off children who, want for nothing. That line hit me, and I was like, yeah, I get it. It's the hubris that kind of creates that disconnect. And it made me wonder, now that you're a parent yourself, like, do you ever wonder, what is it that we as children, as we get older, what do we owe our parents?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to live in my son's pool house, for instance. That's what he owes me. I'm going to grow old in his backyard.
That's right.
Just sort of walking around in a caftan, being like, "We're out of melon." That's literally what he owes me.
That's right.
He's 10 months old.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. What do they owe us? I think there is something so true about what you said, that the idea that, God, I've provided this for you, please don't squander it, is entirely for their benefit. I like to think that everything I'm doing is for him, and everything that I, even just like staying healthy and taking the various precautions that we take in this crazy, this time that we're in right now, is for my child. And so I hope that he's able to like accept the sacrifices that I've made and the work that I've done, and feel appropriately guilty enough to, and it'll come back to the like glib joke at the beginning, to put me up in his, pool house.
It's funny. You were talking about your grandmother as a character, and she comes across so vividly. And I think for a lot of people, especially myself, there's something extraordinarily familiar about her character. I did mention to you earlier when we were chatting that, I hear my Persian mom when I listen to your grandmother's voice. And there's very little separating Persian moms from Jewish grandmothers. They're basically the same person. And also I think the thing that I really attached myself to was the fact that both your grandmother and my mother are prominent know-it-alls, right? Just, you know what I mean? Like, just quintessential know-it-alls.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be fun, right, as we continue. What I wanted to do is let's compare stories. All right. Let's complain about our parents / grandparents. Let's compare stories. Let's share the best advice that we ever got, or nudge, as your grandma would say, the best nudge.
Yeah.
Just
the
a nudge.
Sephardic pronunciation is nudge, Ashkenazi nudge.
Right, exactly. The best advice, the best criticism, and the best guilt trip. Okay, ready? Do you want to go first?
You start.
Should I go? I'll start first. Okay, I'll start. The best advice. Okay, the best advice that I ever got my mother. I went to Harvard Divinity School in order to, become a scholar of religions, which is something my mom was never all that. I'm an immigrant. Like, you can be a doctor, you can be an engineer, and if you're just not smart, then you can be a lawyer. That's it.
Isn't there the Harvard pass?
So that's I thought this is the best part. Is I thought, well, okay. I get the Harvard pass. So a week into school, she calls me on the phone and she goes, "Reza Jun, I just found out that across the street from you is the law school. Why don't you just go there?" Like, that's what it's just like. Oh, you just cross the street. You just cross the street and you walk into. So that's my mother's best nudge. Okay, your turn.
Amazing. Mine was going to be different, but my grandmother has something. My mom, when I moved to LA and started writing for Kimmel, my mom was nudging me back across the country to move to New York. Still hasn't happened. And she very casually on the phone with me once said, "Oh, what is that show? It's on Saturday Night Live. Why don't you just write for them?"
Yeah, why not? It's also at night.
Yeah, I think I tweeted it. It was like, my mom has great career advice. Yeah.
All right. Best criticism. Best criticism. I bought my first house. I was very proud of myself. Bought it myself with my own money. It was like, my family lived in apartments until like I graduated from high school, basically. And I brought my mom to see my brand new house, and she took a tour of the entire thing, never said a word, just quietly like looking from room to room, went upstairs, went downstairs, went to the downstairs bathroom. And I should mention the downstairs bathroom, the toilet paper dispenser was like loose on the wall. And she came upstairs and I said, "Well, Mom, I mean, what do you think? Like, what do you think of my house, my first house?" And she said, "You bought a house with a broken toilet dispenser?"
Oh, God. Jesus. I mean, that's truly, yeah, no, I mean, the therapy for that alone. I mean,
Exactly.
like that's crazy.
All right, best criticism. Best criticism. Grandma.
Criticism. So my grandma was full of my grandma, and I answered for my mom for the best nudge. My grandma was all nudges and criticism. My grandma's nudge was similar about moving to New York, by the way. So my mom's covers it. But for criticism, I feel like my grandma was my biggest cheerleader. She was, which is such a cliche, but she truly, there were soccer games where she was shrieking at the other girls, get away from her, she has sports induced asthma. And so, like she literally
That made you so popular.
I know. I was like, I guess softball for me. But she was right. But her best criticism was always about not living up to her perfect standards. And so I remember I was trying on a dress with her. A lot of the book takes place in dressing rooms.
She loved Bloomingdale's.
Bloomingdale's is a character in this book. After she died, I just walked through Bloomingdale's and just like took in the smells until my eyes watered. Not a place I feel comfortable, but that was that's her shrine. And she told me, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And sort of like did the girl thing where I turned to like my most flattering angle. And she goes, "Oh, honey, if you don't want to immediately if you have to ask me, if you don't want to immediately walk around and show everybody in the store and ask that question, just take it off." And I live by it.
Yeah, there are. The book is replete with comments about your dresses, your clothing choices, just all the time. All right, the best guilt trip. Best guilt trip. Most of the guilt trips all had to do with food with my mom. So the best guilt trip was once I came home to visit after I'd gone to college, and and I landed at the airport, and I got into the rental car, and I was really hungry. So on the way home, I stopped at McDonald's. You know where this is going. God help me. And then when I got home, she's like, "Okay, I made dinner, Persian food, it's like 50 rices and kebabs and all this stuff." And I said, "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry, I'm not really hungry. I ate McDonald's on the way here." And she said, "McDonald's? Okay. You eat all the McDonald's you want. I just go die. I go die, and then you eat McDonald's all day. Okay, that's fine. I mean it." So that's my mother. I should mention she would mention suicide, like
of course,
for anything. Yeah.
Yeah, holding that over you.
But that one was a good one.
That's wow. That'll kill your appetite right there.
I think that's the last time I went to McDonald's, honestly.
Whew, yeah, no, that's the end of that. Yeah.
Right, best guilt trip.
Well, my grandma, this entire book is a guilt trip. My grandma, the entire book is a guilt trip. So my mom was in the second year of her medical residency when I was born, and she was one of the only women in her program at Columbia in the psychiatry program. And so there was no such thing as maternity leave. She went back to work after I think 2 weeks and used vacation days for that. And so my grandma stepped in, and my grandma, the reason that we're so close, the reason, I sort of owed her this book is she really raised me. And my dad was in a different program for a different specialty, but he was also in his medical residency. And so I was a baby alone. They really didn't time it well. And so my grandma would leave me these voicemails, and there are several of them throughout the book, but she would say, just super casually, she would call to say, do you know what I did when you were born? And that's how it would begin. And she would go, I wasn't an old lady. I wasn't a young woman. I was an old lady. I was in my 60s, and I would get on a plane from Palm Beach, and I would fly up on a Tuesday and sit in their terrible apartment by the hospital, and I would hold you and I would talk to you, and we would watch Miami Vice on TV, and I'd tell you about the people on the plane. And then I would get back on the plane on a Thursday, and I would go back to Florida, and then I would do the same thing the next week. And so you should move back to New York by the end of the year. And that was just her MO. She would just leave me these voicemails with a full story about what a nightmare it was that I existed. And then just it was like a tennis match. And then she would just sort of slam in the, like, you should be engaged by this time next summer. Right. Move back to New York end of the year. She was very good at just like surgical with her guilt.
So I had mentioned this earlier. You're now a parent yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, like, have your expectations, I mean, this is a stupid question because the answer is obviously yes, but maybe I should say how have your expectations about motherhood changed now that you are a mother? You have a 10-month-old, so you're still in that stage where you're just trying to hold on for dear life. I get that. But at night when the baby's down and you've had a couple of cocktails and you're starting to think back over on your life, I wonder, it's got to have a major impact on the way that you thought about your mom and your grandmother. How has that sort of changed the way you saw them?
I mean, it was profound. I knew it would, but I didn't know to what degree. And I was in the hospital after my son was born, and he shivered, and I just looked at him, and the flood of my ancestors needing the baby to be warm just sort of came like a Niagara Falls through my spine. And I remember just like, postpartum, I could barely move, but suddenly I was over his bassinet, and I was like, by the way, this was the end of August. I was like tying blankets around him, like a hat, like getting his hat on. And I just needed the baby to be warm. And my husband looked at me and I looked at him, he sort of looked up bleary eyed from his cot. And I was like, I know, I'm my mother. And it was such a crystalline moment of Judaism, of feeling empathy. And I think what that sort of illustrated to me was, oh my God, I get the anxiety. I get how every time I would cough on the phone with my grandma, she would go, what's wrong? What is that? What are you doing? Because, my son sniffles, and I'm like, well, we have to, he has been sick recently, but when he wasn't, and by the way, he's fine now, thank God. But at the slightest sniffle, I get the, like, we have to call urgent care. We have to call the pediatrician. I get that. And I forgive my mother for her anxiety sins, and I will pass them on to him shortly.
Your husband, Charlie, is a wasp. We both married wasps.
Oh, yeah.
That comes up a lot in your book. I mean, it is a big deal. Like, I mean, honestly, like the first time my wife Jessica met my family, we all had like a dinner at my house, and then afterwards, she and I were hanging out, and she goes, "Is everything okay?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Are you guys like? I mean, you guys were fighting during dinner. Is everything okay?" And I was like, "Oh no, that's just talking."
Oh, sweet angel.
That's just, sweetheart. That's just speaking. Like, we shout our emotions at each other for no reason.
Yeah.
How's Charlie? How's Charlie been able to handle this kind of this world that he's walked into?
God bless Charlie. Again, to my face, he handles it well. I don't know if he's on the phone.
Not what he
with us,
told
but
me.
being
No,
like, yeah, exactly right. But he's such a tolerant, patient soul. I mean, you have to be. But he really is just such a genuinely kind person and good person, and also a good like a good code switcher enough that like he's just as comfortable like at Burning Man or at like a boarding school reunion. I married the talented Mr. Ripley. But the no, which is to say he's just genuine. He is who he is, which is such a great quality. And my I think he was really taken aback. I remember the first time that he came over to my parents' apartment. He wondered if I was okay afterwards. Similarly, he was like, "Your
Same
mom
thing,
and you
yeah.
really went at it," and I was like, "No, we were just yelling about Anne Hathaway." Like that
Of
was
course we were.
my mom and I got into a really big fight about The Devil Wears Prada. I don't remember what side either of us were on, but Charlie was like, "That was about nothing."
Anne
and we
Hathaway
both-
is a national treasure side.
Yes,
I
yes,
hope?
yes. Oh, yeah, but
Yeah,
it was
all right,
about. Oh
okay.
my God! But we were talking about it. We were like, it was supposed to be her movie, but then Emily Blunt gets and it was like again, neither of us know either of these people. And my Charlie was like, "You almost brought each other to tears," and immediately forgot about it, and then we're like gossiping about. So who
That's
knows?
how it. Yeah,
It's
that's how it
crazy.
works.
Yeah, but he's such a good guy that he was the first non-Jew I ever brought home. He's the first, and this is in the book. I am the first person in my lineage to marry outside of the faith, outside of the tribe. And
Which I'm sure everybody was totally cool with.
at first it was something that was contentious, but after I think 20 minutes with Charlie, everyone was just so charmed and happy, and all a credit to him. They just, it got to the point where my grandma would call me and she would ask to talk to Charlie. He was the preferred person.
Yes.
of the
Yes.
relationship.
That's definitely, my mom prefers my wife, Jessica, to me. The first time my mom met Jessica, she literally cornered her in the kitchen and said, "Do what you need to do. Get me some babies." So, and she did. Lots of babies.
She did 4. Yeah.
Yeah. So you grew up in the suburbs of New York, right? Your parents were both doctors.
Yep.
But you very early on were sort of gravitating towards comedy, right? You grew up watching Monty Python and The Simpsons and South Park. It's interesting to me when I was reading about sort of, the comedy influences, if you will, is that for the most part, they were all very male-driven shows, right? Maybe The Simpsons, you can make an argument, but South Park is just men farting, just boys farting. And Monty Python is men farting. That's really...
Yes.
And I wonder, did that influence you at all as a female writer? Like, I wonder, like,
the flatulence in particular.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, look, fart jokes are funny no matter.
Oh, ask my baby. Absolutely. Oh my
funny.
God.
Yeah.
Oh, I if there's ever an issue, with our child, like a well-timed raspberry, and you're like, you're Steve Martin. Yeah. But I would say the landscape of comedy is changing for the better now. And when I was growing up, I was sort of forged in the fires of the greats, of Monty Python, of early SNL, of Kids in the Hall, and Simpsons, of course, and Seinfeld. And these were predominantly white straight male enterprises. And that's who had the keys to the castle. And that, and I'm so glad that my comedy heroes now, my comedy friends now, are not white straight men. I mean, some of them are. I'm sorry, Jeff, but some of my dear friends. But I would say growing up, I didn't see a lot of comedians and comedy writers who looked like me and sounded like me, and in that they spoke with a female voice. When I got my job at Kimmel, which in a writer's room, has a completely different presence than
Right.
a male voice. When I got my job at Kimmel in 2012, there were more women on the Supreme Court than in primetime late night shows combined, which is a crazy, crazy statistic.
Wow.
And fortunately, that has changed. There are many more women in late night. There are many more female fronted shows, many more people of color fronted shows. And I'm so glad that my kid will grow up and his favorite shows will hopefully be written by and starring not the old guard of comedy that were my options growing up. Which isn't to say, by the way, there weren't great female comedians doing great work in the 80s and 90s. It just women just were. There was sort of a
Yeah.
token woman in the lineup of a roast. There was a woman who was allowed to sit on Johnny's seat when he was sick, but there wasn't the sort of
Right.
powerhouses that there are now.
And
Yeah.
no question, things are different now, and no question that women are more prominent both behind the camera and in front of the camera. But there are still a lot of challenges to being a woman in comedy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. And I think there are challenges for all kinds of for many people in comedy. I think there's so much work to do. So
Mhm.
I believe that a funny show is made by a better representation of humanity. That's something that one of my mentors, Nell Scovell, once said very eloquently. And there's this sort of tendency for people to hire people who look like them and come from similar pedigrees. There's this sort of, no offense, Harvard.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like all these
yeah. There's
like Harvard dicks in every writer's
no,
room.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got Harvard dicks in my family. That's okay. Maybe I'm raising one. No pressure. Yeah. Oh my God, my poor kid. Maybe he will excavate this from like the remains of Earth and see this and be like, God damn it, as he's like editing the Lampoon. But
That's right.
yeah. With as an ally. But the I think that I hope that comedy continues to change. There is still so much work to do. It's not like, Tina and Amy hosted the Golden Globes. We did it. It's sort of like,
It's
okay,
done.
let's
Yeah.
right. Equality accomplished. No, I think that, one thing that I recently left my job like 2 days before quarantine started, 2 days before lockdown. I gave my notice, and then my goodbye party was over Zoom in April, which was truly strange. But there was this idea in leaving, and that I want the person who comes after me to take my spot to not be a white straight man. And that was something in the exit interview that was really embraced and really
Mm.
something that was then taken to heart. I very much believe in not pulling the ladder up behind you once you get in the door, of making sure that, that's why I mentor women, and I'm part of all kinds of groups of women in comedy. And I anytime a young girl through a friend of a friend gets my email address and is like, I'm thinking of breaking into comedy, I'm like, great, let's get on the phone. Let's do this. I'll tell you what was told to me. And, I don't have the best advice always, but I can sort of tell you my roadmap to here,
Mhm.
and let me know how I can be of help. Yeah,
You had said
I hope
before
it
that
gets better.
your grandma was a big part of the reason why you became a comedy writer. First of all, she's hilarious unintentionally. So,
Yeah.
but I tell us about that. What do you mean by that? What about her sort of pushed you into this world that you've entered?
Yeah, I sort of realized this while I was writing the book, that wouldn't this be sort of a neat tie-in? And it was 100% true. My grandma's the common refrain throughout my life was, "What would a man do?"
Mm.
And she was somebody who was very limited in her career prospects. She was once told she could be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. All great jobs, but not something that she was necessarily passionate about. And so to have to choose between sort of women's jobs for a woman who wanted to go into business, wanted to be a builder, I think she felt culturally stymied. And so in me, she saw this opportunity for the kind of trajectory that she was never able to have. And so when I started out as a writer, I was a journalist. I was a fact checker at Wired magazine. I was sort of neatening up the writing of mostly men. To be completely honest, it was a male dominated enterprise there for sure. Which is something I only realized later on, that like my job was literally being like, I'll make you look good, sir. And I wasn't frustrated by that at the time. I was just grateful to be paid to be writing tangentially, like to be in the room and have healthcare, and that's fine. But my grandma, from her perch, in her beach chair was sort of like, no, you're the star, and I was like, untrue. So like, and that's putting a lot on me. But she ended up telling me, Bessie, if I wanted to wanted to do anything as much as you want to write for The Simpsons, God help the world. And so she was the one who told me to reach out to my friend Nell, who I mentioned earlier. Great. She's a former Simpsons letterman, writer, Vanity Fair contributing editor. And I ended up, because of my grandma, emailing this woman who was successful in comedy and said, look, you like my Twitter. You seem to be someone who knows that I am capable of writing jokes. Do you have any advice for me? And here I am 8 years later.
Wow.
A Webby Award winner.
Yes. Are you literally the only person on earth who got hired because of Twitter instead of fired?
No. Oh my God. Yeah. Instead of fired. I mean, it's a matter of time, God.
Yeah. Eventually, yeah. Give it a few minutes and
truly. Right. What? Yeah. But no, many of my friends actually have been hired because of their tweets. It's a great democratizer. I was a kid in San Francisco. I was not brave enough to be a stand-up comedian. I wasn't like friends with all the cool comedy kids. I was just a nerd fact checker writing my jokes. And so to be noticed for purely my writing without sort of hobnobbing in LA was really a great opportunity. And unfortunately, none of that matters because Twitter is a bad and should not exist. And is going to be responsible for the like looming nuclear winter / fall of democracy. But thanks for the Writers Guild.
At least we'll be all like clever about it.
We'll be clever about it. Totally.
We'll be snarky and clever as we're all living in our basements, slowly starving to death.
Right.
Anyway, let's talk about craft for a minute. We actually kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in our conversation about capturing your grandmother's voice. Voice, of course, is one of the trickier elements of the craft of writing. I think for a lot of people, they think of voice as just about capturing, phrases or rhythms of speech, that it's about, proper syntax and diction and all of those things. But voice is actually, as a narrative device, far more complicated than that, because the chief function of voice in writing is to reveal character. Right? Yeah. You write in a voice, you give a character a voice primarily because you want to say something about them. You want to express their emotions. You want to express their qualities, their subtleties. It's a very, very hard thing to master. And even when you do master it, it's very hard to sustain. And I think truly the sort of the real magic of this book is that from, page 2 or so, when you start to kind of get into what we're about to read here, you capture your grandmother's voice and you sustain it, right? It's you really get to know who this person is as a character, based on simply the way that she talks. Tell us a little bit about what it was like trying to capture her voice. How did you do it? Was it just a matter of, listening to a lot of her voicemails? I know you had like banks of voicemails that you've collected. tell us about the complexities of what it was like to capture your grandmother's voice and to reveal her character through it.
Yeah. Sure. Well, thank you for saying I did it successfully. It's really it's very surreal to release a book into a pandemic because I have not met many readers. So to even hear that reflection is, and especially from you, my God, that's I'm verklempt. So thank you for that.
Good night, everybody.
Really, yeah. Good.
Let's
You
stop
got a
right
little
there.
Yiddish out of her. We're out of here. But I will say, I read something recently that there was a algorithm that read 10,000 hours of Shakespeare and then was able to auto generate a full, sonnet and write
Yeah.
write an iambic pentameter and write in Shakespearean verse. And I feel like I am that algorithm for Bobby Bell. I have 10,000 hours of her in me. And so if you're like, what would she think about the flamingo lawn ornament on your neighbor's lawn? I could do that.
It just
it's like,
turns
what would you-
on.
Totally. It's just like I am but like a series. I am like a binary, regurgitation machine for my grandma. And she did that totally on purpose. I think the reason for the sort of the tomes of voicemails, the reason for the megabytes of information I have on my phone, and the reason for the hours and hours of stories, repeating the same story ad nauseum was so that I would have it in me, so that even if it wasn't intentional specifically with this directive of write a book, it was, I need to live on in my granddaughter. I'm going to tell her my stories in order to live. To borrow a quote. And I really do see this exercise in voice as me sort of doing my grandma's lifelong bidding. I feel like the scribe following her as she told her stories, and that's what this book totally is. And I will also say, to your point about voice, that I write in characters. That's what I do by trade. That's what I did
Sure.
at Kimmel. That's what I do when I write speeches or for other people. It's easier for me to write if I'm writing in the voice of someone else.
Interesting. Right. Of course. I mean,
Yeah.
like for years, you got paid to put words in Jimmy Kimmel's mouth. So you must have already been
many
sort of
other
primed.
writers.
And many other writers, right,
Yeah,
exactly. The
yeah,
Academy, the
yeah.
awards and award.
No, I'm saying
you've
many
done a
other.
lot.
It wasn't just. Oh no, I'm saying many other writers wrote for Jimmy. It's not like I was writing for his.
It was. Oh, I thought it was just you. I thought it was like
no.
you
Yeah, no.
with your hand in Jimmy's butt, just
No, and
moving
also, by
his
the way,
mouth.
Jimmy. No. I feel very uncomfortable
I'm just kidding.
about.
I would feel
about.
uncomfortable with my hand in
About
Jimmy's
that.
butt too.
About that I feel very comfortable. That's the type of relationship that anyone should have with their boss. But I
Sure.
feel uncomfortable taking credit. What I actually feel uncomfortable with is taking credit for anybody else's voice, because that is entirely his own. But it was my job to fit the mold. Totally.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
Totally.
like to sort of
to write in the voice of the show. Yeah.
To know his rhythms,
Yeah.
to know his
Totally.
affectation, and then
Yeah.
to do that, it must have in some way primed you for
Totally
being able to capture your grandmother's voice.
Yes, as counterintuitive as it is, I honestly do feel like writing for a man in late night, like one-off jokes, absolutely was the training I needed to write a novel, essentially, or to write a book in the voice of a 90-year-old dead woman who I loved.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is, A, it taught me how to write all the time, to write every day with a gun to your head. You have to fill up the page. There's a show every night. You can't not have anything to write that day.
Right.
Like you just have to do it. Blinking cursor be damned. Like that page has to be full. Your joke deadline is at 9 a.m. You have to get your material in. People are relying on you. People's jobs are relying on you. Your job is relying on you. And the other.
Wow, there's nothing. I'm just thinking about like how unfunny it is to have to like write jokes on deadline. It's like,
totally.
Be funny now.
that's yeah, with like shooting at your feet. Totally. That and I, that's what I spent the better part of a decade doing. But it was amazing training, because you kind of learn how to facilitate a joke, and you learn how to sort of put news through a Rube Goldberg machine and like have a take and have it in like a sort of plug and play joke-ish format. And then like occasionally there'll be like one. There's nothing less funny than talking about joke writing, but this is all to say it was incredible mechanical training for writing. Just the
Right.
act of writing and the act of writing funny jokes ended up making me really careful with word choice. Even though I would love to say this was sort of a freewheeling channeling of my grandma's voice, there was a lot of editing that went into this.
Mm.
There was a
Hmm.
lot of like, how does this sentence end in a way that's going to make the reader laugh? How does this sentence end in a way that's going to make the reader cry? And to do that, it did get it, there were arguments with not arguments, but I was sort of like, if it's okay, argument for me is like, can I leave that M dash in? I know it's not grammatically correct, but there has to be a pause. And they're like, whatever, authors. But yeah, there was such precision to figuring out how to transpose a person into prose. And
Yeah.
um, I'm really grateful for my comedy writing job for giving me the tools to do that.
What do you think was the most difficult part of channeling her voice? Getting it right.
Yeah, I think the most difficult part was the last part of the book where she was not writing about her life anymore. She was writing about my life after she died. And that felt like it was like what a lot of nerve to write that. And I better do it right if I'm going to do that. And so I was no longer, that's sort of like when the training wheels were off, I no longer had her stories to retell. I had, it was this sort of abyss that I had to use her
Yeah.
voice to describe. And it was really hard as a writer, but more so as a granddaughter. That writing this, I'm talking about her a little bit in the abstract. We're talking about the character of Bobby, but this is a woman who, raised me and I love and miss. And so writing that was really the most painful part of the entire process. And there were times when I thought, I can't do this. This book is just going to end in the middle of a chapter because to go on is really painful. Maybe they'll think it's like David Simon. This is like Sopranos or whatever,
It just stops.
Chase, yeah, not wrong, David, but but yeah, it just stops. But yeah, I think I ended up being able to put my emotions aside as a granddaughter and just sort of lean into the character and uncover the truth in her perspective and what she would see. And as a result, I find that I was able to hopefully honor her and come to terms with her death in 50
Yeah.
pages or so at the end.
The end that you're talking about, your grandmother Bobby starts to speak from beyond the grave. Actually, throughout the book, she regularly speaks from beyond the grave. But at the end, when she's passed in the narrative, she's speaking from beyond the grave. And I'll just read this last section because I think it's just beautiful. This is Bobby, your grandmother, speaking. What have I always told you, Bessie? What have I always said? You're my angel. I am you. I'm the bones in your body and the blood that fills you up and the meat around your legs. I'm the softness of your cheeks and the way they freckle in the summer, and I'm the streaks of rust in your hair, and I'm the nose under your nose and the eyes that narrow with fire and roll backward in delight at all the same things. I'm your style. I'm your laugh. I'm the rage in your heart that I'm not here. You're the body I left behind. I made sure of that. From the moment I met you, I never stopped telling you my stories because nobody will write them but you. It's a beautiful moment there. Talk about that delicate balance, right, between your grandmother's voice and your voice, right? Your voice is in here. It's not like you disappear. You come in, you speak for yourself quite often. How do you maintain that balance?
It was a relief to be the straight woman.
Right.
I sort of
That's right. That's
sort of,
right.
I let her do the talking, and in the conversations where I am present, I'm a character, I insert myself, I'm just reacting to her. And that's sort of how I felt writing her, that there were so many moments where I started to sound crazy, but I would write a line in her voice and then I would laugh. And my husband will tell you I am always the person who laughs hardest at my own jokes. But it's very becoming. It's very cool. And it's, normal, but it was fun to sort of have her shine and allow her voice and her comedy. I think I was able to be funnier than I am by being funny through her. Um, I think she is funnier than I am. She was able to really level a room with just like the arch of an eyebrow. You've said unintentionally funny, totally, totally, but there were definitely times where she was like, "Oh, Evelyn would go to the opening of an envelope," and it's like, there were definitely like crazy, crazy. She could have basically been like a road comic for all her wit, and so I think having like narrative intrusion of the author was something that I tried to have a light touch with. I tried to allow myself to let her shine and just sort of react almost as a surrogate for the reader or audience, to what she said. Like there were times in the text where, and there's a lot of dialogue in this book. It's a quick read, a lot of white space,
a lot of photographs, which I always appreciate.
Pictures, which is nice.
Pictures.
It's a relief.
Yeah.
Exactly. You don't have to picture the characters. Here they are. I always like that growing up.
So does my 5-year-old.
Exactly. So does my 10-month-old. Especially if there's a fuzzy part. Next book it'll be there'll be a bunny with a tummy, but I will say that I did feel like I was trying not to get too writerly. I was trying not to get too precious. I'm a self-editing self-doubting writer. I always would I sort of triple judge my own writing. And so I tried to pare myself down as much as possible in this book and really let her voice and her perspective and her turns of phrase shine. And in the moment that you read, it was definitely a place where I was able to sort of put both of our sort of perspectives together. And I think that the payoff there is you get her character, but there was a writer doing it. And I think that's why friends have called and said that my book made them very upset. But I think my challenge in this book, my job was really just letting her shine and letting her voice carry the narrative.
There are a lot of wonderful themes in the book. We talked about sort of the relationship between mothers and daughters and grandmothers and daughters and all of that stuff. But fundamentally, I would say the central theme of the book is grief. This really is a book about grieving. It's funny. I say this to my students all the time. I have a lot of students who want to write about grief, want to write about terrible things that have happened to them or great losses that they have had, or, stories about losing a loved one, things like that. And I try to explain to them that there really is nothing harder than writing about grief. It is unquestionably the most difficult topic to write about because there is a fundamental problem with empathy, which is that as terrible as the situation is for you, as raw as the emotions are for you, as objectively awful as what you are describing may be, it doesn't matter because nobody cares.
Totally.
Nobody cares about what's happening with you. Nobody cares about your experience. I mean, this is the problem right now when we talk about the tens of thousands of people that have died, as a result of COVID. It's impossible to feel bad about hundreds of thousands of dead people, but it's very easy to feel bad about one dead person.
That's right.
The problem is that so much of writing about grief relies on sympathy and not empathy, right? Sympathy, as I always try to remind people, is the death of literature. If your reader feels bad for you, you have failed.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. You don't want your reader to feel bad for you. You want your reader to to empathize with you. Doing it obviously in her voice, I think is very clever in that regard. But I wonder if, as you were writing this book and simultaneously dealing with your own very real, very raw, emotions and grief about this, was it in the top of your mind about the difficulty of trying to get other people to feel about your grandmother the way that you felt about her? And how did you do that? What tricks did you use in order to drag the reader along?
Yes, my tricks. Well,
yes,
as I am a witch, and so
that makes sense.
So yeah, there are a couple newts. The cauldron was at a specific temperature. I mean, you're 100% right on about it, and it was a huge concern. And again, the self-doubt, the amount of self-doubt versus writing that this book represents is sort of, the scale is very much tipped on the side of questioning the merit of this enterprise altogether. Even my proposal letter to my literary agent, Erin Malone, who's so wonderful and really the first reader of this book and such a brilliant reader. I wrote an apology. I was like, look, this is I said the word self-indulgent grief exercise. 90-year-old woman dies. What she lived a great life. And it was very much her time. This is not a tragedy by any means. In fact, this is the most normal thing to happen since birth. This is just a natural process occurred. And here's my, sort of siren song about it. Here's my wailing, screed. But I wrote this apology, and she wrote back, and I sent her what is now the first 40 pages of the book. And she said, "This is not bad. Everybody needs to read this." And I think that there is something in especially American culture that makes talking about death really difficult and sort of couched in cliche and platitudes and these sort of comfort words that sanitize the entire experience. And I found after my grandma died, I was almost apologetic for feeling sad. My grandma died is almost sounds like an excuse to get out of writing a paper in college. It's not it's like, right? It's like, it's not, right? It's not there's nothing that this is not like a cataclysm. There won't, now there will be, but there wouldn't be a movie centered on, there's nothing dramatic about it at all. And so I think what I had to do was just be really frank about death and be really forthright and really upfront, and start it with just how would a woman feel getting covered by dirt by her whole family? Just be very matter of fact about it. And the book begins, it's a terrible thing to be dead. And it doesn't begin, it's a terrible thing to lose a grandmother. Even lose a grandmother is a cliche. It's a terrible thing to be dead. And so writing in this sort of, I guess, as I lay dying-ish, to write from the perspective of, again, I hate, this is not as I lay dying, but I just want to be very clear.
Did you just compare yourself to Faulkner?
Yeah. No,
who the hell do you think you are?
Exactly. I don't. No, again, this is truly my nightmare. Yeah, I'm like, it's there was a book in Madeline. She lost a grandma, so maybe it's like that. Or there was a Berenstein Bears about it. It's closer to that. So, but I think telling it from the perspective of the deceased helps get around the sort of pity idea of why do I feel bad for you. And
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully it succeeded. And
I wonder,
a lot of chutzpah.
I wonder, do you think that you could have written this book while your grandmother was alive?
There were parts that I kind of did write. Well, I would write down conversations after I had them with her. I even had, I had a habit of, even sometimes with like my writing partners, if my grandma called, I would be like, should I? And they'd be like, speakerphone. I would put her on speakerphone because she was just so unbelievable. Like no one could believe that she was saying these things. And like afterward, like I would get off the phone and Charlie would come and I would be like, I'm sorry, I have to write down nobody wants to come home to salmon. Like there were lines that are in the book that
truer words.
Totally.
I say to
Right?
my wife all the time, I do not want to come home to
Come home
Finland.
to that.
Please.
Right. It's a nightmare. And so she just had she had line after line, and also she was just so right all the time, and her timing was so great. And I had a lot of material to work with while she
Mm.
was alive, fortunately. And but I don't think that this book at all would have been what it ended up being if she were alive. This is very much a book about her being gone. It's almost like I buried her in this book. This is
Yeah.
this is what I have left of her. And I it makes me sad because it is a test. I'm like holding it, but it is a testament to her life, but it is also proof of her death. The book existing in my house is a reminder that she's gone. It's mixed.
What do you miss most about her? I know it's a tough question, but
No, it's
I get to ask tough questions.
Yeah,
And then I sit back here and let other people answer them.
Yeah, totally. Damn it. And I, don't make me look inward. Yeah.
Cry, God damn it.
Okay. The sleep deprivation I have, honestly.
Not that hard, yeah.
It's such a banal thing. It's not at all. I just miss her. It's not a specific thing at all. It's just her being there, being able to pick up my phone and hear hello, just in her voice. I just miss the reassurance of her existence. And it is such a general thing to miss, but it is the thing I miss most. That even knowing that I'm able to call her, knowing that we're able to sort of breathe into our respective phones at each other is what I miss most, because I feel like that covers, and it's sort of a cheat answer, but it does cover all of the times when I need her most. Like, my son, isn't actually pulling himself up at the age the book says he's supposed to pull himself up. Did my mom
What do I
not
do? Yeah.
right? Yeah. Or should I am I picking him up too much? Is it because I'm over momming him? Is it there's so many things that I just want her to be like, you're doing everything right. You throw out that book. That book is not for geniuses like our baby. And fortunately, I have enough of her in me to sort of turn my head back on straight, but I miss that, the potential energy of her on the other side of the phone.
You kind of brought this up just kind of in an offhand way, but I guess maybe there might be a screen version of this book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How weird is that going to be? Like seeing,
God.
Meryl Streep as your grandmother.
Thank you so much. Yes. I feel like this is for Meryl, it's an honor.
And obviously Anne Hathaway would play you.
No. Oh my God. I have no idea. The casting there have been some wild people It is crazy to know that this book has, gotten into the hands of anyone outside my immediate family. And so knowing people that I know of who are love the book, it's well, that's not allowed. Too personal. This was a judgment error on my part. But yeah, I think for whatever reason, having a movie of this makes it all so much more public facing. And a book, it's sort of for book people, these are my people. We can that's okay. But I don't, anyone can stroll by a billboard and Google. But I do feel very excited for my grandma that she gets to be my grandma loved the movies. Her mother loved going to the movies. Growing up in New York, Hollywood was the furthest thing from anyone's imagination. And to know that she gets to sort of have her moment in the lights, I'll write a very glamorous character for her. There'll definitely be a glamorous scene of her examining herself in a Chanel suit with her perfect red lipstick. And I know in that moment,
Bloomingdale's, of course.
In Bloomingdale's, of course. In that moment, I'll just be like, "We did it, Grandma."
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for that. Assuming there's still a world by then.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So we end every episode of Rough Draft with what we call the 5 rapid fire questions. Are you ready for these?
I'm ready for these.
Really, really hard. Your grandma is watching. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, she is.
Question number 1. What is your favorite book?
Slouching Toward Bethlehem.
Oh, very fancy.
No, it's
Gideon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so pretentious, but it is the book. I even quoted her, unsubtly in this. We tell ourselves stories in order to live is a Didion line. I feel like I am just trying to be Didion. It's not like it's like all of the times where you're like, oh, that's writerly. That's me just being like, I'm doing an imitation of Joan Didion right now.
Yeah. I mean, she's best sentences,
Yes.
of any writer in the last 50 years.
Yes.
Tell us about your writing process. Tell us about your joke writing process. You're actually weirdly, I think, our 16th guest on Rough Draft, and we've never had a comedy writer before. So let's do our best to suck the funny out of comedy as much as possible. And tell us, how does one write a joke? Knock, knock.
Oh yeah. First of all, yeah, you need to start with
You
a knock.
start with knock, knock.
You start with knock, knock. Or a what do you get?
What's with the pillows on airplanes? Yeah, you got it.
That's right. Look, and there's your mansion in the Hamptons or whatever from that.
Yeah.
I think.
Tell us how it works for you.
For me, I cannot speak specifically to comedy. I can speak only specifically to my experience, and it's by force. It's just by blunt force. When I would write for Kimmel, we'd get an assignment every day. It was like writing for a daily newspaper. There would be a breakdown of about 10 topics, each with a Reuters or AP headline, and then a paragraph summarizing underneath. You were responsible for like 3 to 5 jokes per topic, and then overall 3 sketches. And I would sit down with like coffee and then later pregnant decaf coffee, via Harvard, and just do it. And I think you get some alacrity after a while. In my later years at the show, I was able to sort of do it. I'm like a grizzled veteran now, at 32, but you get a hang of it. At the beginning, I would write from the moment I got home at the end of a show to going to bed and then waking up to the moment jokes were due. After a while, you learn it. But I think what guides me in writing it, to get specific, is never punch down. That, like, if I'm writing a joke, your angle has to be taking down somebody with more power than you. That's a baseline. I think the satisfaction from hearing that joke is so much greater, and the ethics involved in writing that joke are preserved. So how do I dismantle a system of power with words? Or just be like, Kardashian, honey boo boo, I'm out of here. It's not all like holding a mirror to society. My writing partner Jeff and I would often hand each other a Mirror to Society award for just the stupidest joke. So yeah, you start with highfalutin lofty goals and you end up just getting the joke on the page.
Farts,
exactly.
Farts.
Exactly.
Never fails.
Yeah.
Question number 3. If you weren't a writer, what would you be?
I would be a floral designer.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes, I would.
Would you really?
For weddings and parties.
Wow.
100%. I do my friends' weddings. I did my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's wedding. I would have a flower shop, and I would have a quiet life, and I would look at flowers all day and make pretty arrangements for nightmare brides.
I feel like I know you in a completely new way now.
It's my secret. It's my break in case of emergency plan.
All right. Question number 4. What is the worst writing advice you have ever gotten?
Oof, I feel like all writing advice is bad writing advice.
Yeah, I mean,
all writing
it
just
it's very subjective.
It's totally subjective. What works for me does not work for anyone else. What works for anyone else does not work for me. But I would definitely say the worst writing advice is any advice your parent gives you.
That's right. That's a very good point.
No, don't take a walk. I need to take a walk.
That's good. Never listen to your parents when it comes to writing. I mean, you are a parent, so this last question may be moot, but what's the best writing advice that you can give to anyone except your own child?
Yeah, thank you. Don't be afraid. I'm going to actually say it in probably improper English, but don't be afraid to write bad. To write badly, I guess. Don't just get it on the page. Don't get precious. Don't worry if it's good. Just get it on the page. That's that's my that is
Yeah.
advice that I live by, because occasionally good things come out of it.
It's very good advice.
Oh,
The
thank you.
book is called Nobody Will Tell You This But Me. I love this book. Please pick it up,
Oh.
everyone. Oh, look, we both have one. That's nice. Look, that's nice.
Cheers.
Bess Kalb, thank you so much for being a part of Rough Draft Live. This is actually our final episode of Rough Draft Live of the summer. Hopefully we'll be back a little bit later on. You can find recordings of the previous Rough Draft Lives with Lawrence Wright and Mikhail Jolet, and this one with Bess Kalb on the 92nd Street Y website. And all previous episodes of Rough Draft, of course, are available on topic.com, and you can get 2 months free of the streaming service if you put in the code 92SY. If you go to topic.com, you get 2 months and you get to watch all the other fun episodes in which I am far drunker than I am tonight. Bess, this was so much fun.
This was so much fun. What a dream.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Reza.
I can't wait to see what you do next. And I love your stuff, and I think you're awesome.
I'm such a fan, and it means the world. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.